So hello everyone. We are Hypercube, Andrea Lodge, Jay Source, Chris Graham, and myself, Aaron Rogers, and we are here today with Dennis Sullivan, composer of Under Nails, which is the first track of our recent debut album, Brain on Fire. We're going to talk to Dennis a little bit today about the piece and get some insight into creation, and we'll listen to a few excerpts, we'll listen to questions, feedback, and I guess prior to starting all that, we want to give a little bit of context to the piece. Some fun facts I wanted to just put out there. Under Nails was written in 2016, and it is just about 13 minutes in length. This piece showcases all of us as performers on our instruments, but also as multitaskers. So in addition to tenor saxophone, electric guitar, piano, and percussion, Dennis has us doing multiple different things throughout the piece. And I thought I'd show a few little pictures just to give you a sense of the setup of the piece. This is a piece that takes, for us, probably about 30 minutes to set up for any performance. So it's no small task. We carry around a large bin with equipment in it for Under Nails. We have a sheet of measurements for the piano strings, for the different instruments that will go inside the piano. You have Andrea, who's not only playing piano, but also a sampler keyboard, which is triggering electronic sounds. And you'll see, I think later we'll talk a little bit about the preparations inside the piano. Here's Chris, who's also playing a sampler keyboard. So in addition to the percussion setup, he's doing a variety of things, but triggering sounds from the keyboard. Jay and I, here is one instance in the piece where we're both performing on a Bautoffel, I believe, which Dennis can talk a little bit about, which is attached to fishing wire that is tied to strings in the piano. Here you have some copper wire with a styrofoam dome that I'm bowing in addition to playing the tenor saxophone. Oh, and I should mention with Jay also, you'll see the microphone there. He's performing a vocoder. And here's a picture of the full setup. Fun fact about this piece is that it actually is the inspiration for our ensemble formation, our stage setup going forward. So this is the first piece where we were in the cube formation, which is what we familiarly call this setup. Andrea's back is to the audience. Jane, Chris, and I are all facing inward to the piano, which allows us to cue each other and to also access the piano from various angles and to allow the audience a kind of a bird's eye view of what we're doing. This piece was the first one we recorded in July 2017, the first one of all the pieces on the album. And you can see here Zach, with all the various instruments and sound sources, I think had a total of 15 microphones in place. Zach Hershen, audio engineer extraordinaire. That should give a little bit of a context to the piece. And Dennis, I guess my first question to you, seeing as there are so many instrumental sounds in the piece and non-instrumental sounds, I'm curious to know, just as a composer, how you deal with color and just how you imagine using all of these sounds, how you imagine practically these sounds working together. Just talk a little bit about your process and your mindset when you think of that.
Sure. I think, well, in particular with this setup, like it's kind of trying to find a center point where the instruments kind of meet, and then find like the ways that they can kind of fracture and grow out from that central place. We'll probably talk about this later, but that's kind of done both sonically and physically. Physically being the interior of the piano kind of being a center point where everybody meets. So color. I mean, I use a lot of kind of noisy textures. Kind of akin to white noise, or kind of like the idea of snares on a snare drum, where you kind of have like a very pitched sound without the snares, and you flip the snares on and you kind of get this almost frequency modulated, like noisy texture that winds up being very complex. And I find those textures and sounds to be harmonically rich enough that they can kind of act as like an adhesive between two kind of conflicting sound worlds. As far as reveal goes, I kind of view it like a filter. Like if you're working with a filter in a DAW, you can kind of drag a filter to a certain point where the sound kind of loses the characteristics that make it what it is. So, like the idea that you could take a saxophone playing, B flat and trumpet playing a B flat and put them next to each other and filter them down to the point where they pretty much sound like the exact same thing. And as you slowly drag that filter back, all the harmonics and tone colors within those instruments that timbrely make them sound like themselves kind of reveal themselves till they actually then start to sound like two different instruments. And so that's definitely the idea in this piece, and probably the idea in a lot of my work, is to kind of start in this place of like filtered obscurity where you can't really hear where things are coming from and can't have a harder time picking out particular instruments, and to kind of reveal those, be it a slow reveal, be it a very quick reveal, be it, reversing that and starting in the opposite way where you can very clearly pick things out and then kind of like dunk it in the filter soup or like vat of filtering. Um, yeah, but I mean, I'm definitely interested in very noisy textures, things where you can hear like the intricacies of friction, um, where you can hear kind of like grinding sounds, things where you can hear something catching and releasing and catching and releasing and catching and releasing over and over again. And whether that's a bow on a wire or a rosined stick on fishing line or the reed of the saxophone vibrating, or a pick slide or whatever, like the idea of something catching and releasing over and over again is interesting to me.
Yeah, and I'd like to just play the beginning of the piece till about the minute 30-second mark. We talk about reveal. I mean, you wonder what instrument is making the sound. Um, where is the sound in terms of the mix, and also, what genre are we in a lot of ways. So that's one of the things that I really, really enjoy about the piece is that there's a slow reveal and that you don't know, you have all this time just in your head to figure out what's actually going on, what am I hearing, what am I listening to. As a player and an avid listener of this type of music, that's a really great challenge. So that's the first little excerpt. I'd like turn it over. I know, Jay, you had a question.
Yeah, Dennis, I know you've talked about the idea of triggers. You'll have an event, maybe it's a piano chord, and then at the exact moment of cutoff, the guitar sort of jumps in, and you'll have this sequence with these like, very quick sort of jump cut qualities. And I just remember, I don't know that I've heard that term used a lot. It makes perfect sense describing some of the material in this piece and how it works. And maybe you could just talk about that and where you got the idea from it, and how much that shows up in your piece.
Yeah. Um, So yeah, just like you said, like triggers kind of like short sound triggers long sound is a very like simple way to describe it. Um, and I guess there were two. I can like think of two defining moments where I started thinking about that idea a lot. One was playing Helmut Lachenmann's percussion solo, Interior, um, where he uses a lot of kind of like sympathetic resonance. And asking, like cymbals to be, directly over toms. So like the force of the tom would make the cymbals resonate, or there's like a bongo sitting right over the timpani so that bongo resonates in the timpani and you move the pitch around. Um, and so that got me really interested in the idea of giving a sustain to a sound that naturally doesn't have one. Or giving like a duration or a resonance to something that normally wouldn't have it, and not in the way that like a large concert hall or space would, but like where the properties of that sound and instrument are still there, but there's like kind of something else imposing its own characteristic and tone colors on that sound. And then from electronics, yeah, really like two guitar pedals that got me thinking a lot about this. One was the Electro-Harmonix Cathedral Reverb which is like a fine reverb. It's like not the most incredible, but it's got this one feature where you can capture and freeze the reverb. And I remember seeing that advertised and then immediately becoming obsessed with the idea of just like, I'm going to sustain wood blocks. And that's like this project I became like obsessed with like 10 years ago, is just like setting up a bunch of wood and like putting a sustain to these very, naturally dry instruments, and the idea of there being like infinite sustain. So, and then the Electro-Harmonix also has that freeze pedal, which does its own kind of thing. But yeah, I think the idea is that again, more of this kind of like smoke and mirrors idea that I said, very simplistically, like short sound triggers long sound, but to take care that there are some kind of sonic properties that double over. So if it's going to be, a very short piano chord in like the prepared earplugged muted notes, to like then try and find, a saxophone multiphonic that like carries some of the similar properties, or yeah, actually there isn't even another example. That's like it's pretty much always that's almost always the end game with that technique, is to try and give a sustain. And again, I guess it goes back to this idea of filtering, like you're just kind of like putting it through a new lens or a new filter, so that like some of the properties remain, some of them have disappeared, some of them have become something else, but is still somehow related to the thing that triggered it in the first place. And I think that works. I think it's just as effective triggering something on as triggering something off. Um, but the idea of like triggers and switches, I find to be really interesting.
I'm just thinking about how you use the guitar pedals. I mean, as like a little microcosm of that idea. Like even within my own setup, sometimes I'm freezing something and then applying ring modulator to the frozen sound, or or vocoder on top of that, and sort of you're doing that, but across the entire ensemble, uh,
Mm-hmm.
sort of. Right?
Yeah, I mean the appealing thing about number one, the appealing thing with the electric guitar and the pedal board is like you now have this like modular synth kind of thing like at your on the floor, which is really great. I like I like that it's fixed. I like that, we don't really like, I kind of like the option that we can't really do a lot of tweaking to it unless we get you off the guitar and have you like get down there. So I like having these I like having these blocks of textures to work in. And then yeah, the idea what I really liked about the freeze, having you freeze sounds is then you have the initial like attack transients of the guitar that then some of the which are picked up or not within the freeze pedal. Like, are you freezing it right as is it getting picked on string? Is it getting resonance or something kind of in between there? And then as you go down near the signal chain of your pedal board, depending on what you're getting from the freeze pedal, it's going to react totally differently. But like that initial sound is always there. So like in a way that pedal board is like a really kind of perfect little world to experiment with these kinds of ideas, because no matter how far we get away from the original sound, we can always go back. Once it's frozen, it's there, and I really like that. And then using percussion, wooden sound, or a slap tongue or something like that to kind of like trigger those things on and off.
So it's interesting. You mentioned a little bit about the piano preparations. I think you mentioned earplugs in particular, and I think Andrea probably has a question or two about it too.
Yeah, as a pianist, I've played many pieces that involve extended techniques and prepared piano, but rarely are they used as extensively as they are in your piece, Dennis. So I just wanted to ask you about your process in designing these extended techniques and piano preparations because they open up such a wide range of color. It's like another instrument when it's prepared and used in the way that you prescribe us to use it in. So I'm wondering like how you came up with these kinds of sounds and what was your inspiration behind finding these sounds? Like, did you want them to match other instruments or match electronics, for example, or did you want them to be a whole sound world of their own?
Yeah. Well, I would say that the instruments outside of that, like piano hub, are they serve that as like they serve the piano hub as opposed to the piano hub serving the other instruments. Like that came first. And the initial idea was to kind of I was thinking about kind of like shared space, and I don't know if there was any like I don't know if it had anything to do with being in New York and feeling like everybody's on top of each other all the time. It seems relevant now, but I'm probably just applying how I feel now to how I felt then. But I liked the idea. I was thinking about the idea of kind of having everybody in there and kind of being in each other's way and like actually and having to like have these like highly choreographed movements to stay out of each other's way. We kind of quickly abandoned that because Jay with the guitar on, like, you can only get so close before the guitar bangs into the piano. Same thing with the saxophone. Navigating Chris's setup in a way that he could get that close. It felt like it maybe wasn't worth it. I definitely didn't want to like have to swing the guitar around or the saxophone around. Like I didn't want to have to take that time. I wanted to be able to quickly get back and forth. And so that's where the idea of these extensions came from. And so there's, I guess, three kinds of extensions. Two of them have like resonators on the end, be it like a tin can or a styrofoam dome, which has these like incredible properties of like transferring resonance of whatever vibration gets anywhere near it. It seems just becomes significantly louder and like more brilliant in a really like wonderfully lo-fi way. And definitely like all the credit in the world to late great Matthias Kahl, a wonderful German percussionist and composer, and I know kind of sound alchemist and somebody who's been an inspiration to a lot of particularly my generation of percussionists and composers and whatnot. And so he is like the foam dome copper wire guru. um, and So yeah, they were inspired by him, and so they're wrapped around the piano wire in a way that, or the piano strings in a way that if you pull them taut, the piano can either shoot the sound through the dome or the can. You can bow the dome or the can, or the wire or the fishing line. The copper wire probably like keeps more of the like sonic properties of the string, and the fishing line tends to just kind of be like an extension to bow, but also like when you bow or pluck those, that like excites the piano strings and gets them resonating. So you'll get like this kind of scratchy tone, noisy tone of bowing the line or the wire, but also the resonance of the piano, which then does interesting things with the pedals up or down. It reacts the same way as any other like string instrument, like any string that's like fixed at 2 points. Like you get closer to the bridge and you get more overtone and more like of a scratchy sound, and then you move out and you get more fundamental, if there is a fundamental to those things. Um, yeah, and I guess the rest of the preparations. Oh, there's a Aaron mentioned a Vautoffel, which so a Vautoffel is like a very small single-headed drum that's got a piece of line, fishing line, or usually like gut string coming out of it with a small rosin stick on it, and you can make these real like kind of sound like little forest critters. And as you tighten and loosen the string, it moves in pitch, and you can also like swing it over your head. So we made something similar to that, which is like a piece of fishing line tied to the string, and then just kind of shaved out a little groove in a piece of a drumstick and rosined that, and it kind of creates a similar friction as a Vautoffel, but really just acts as a way to like get the other strings resonating. And the rest of the preparations aren't like, uh, all that unique as far as like the world of piano preparation, like weaving dimes in between the three strings, using the earplugs, using erasers. And I mean, they're particularly specifically tuned to match different chords, or to make interesting chords and create interesting kind of like dyads and quarter tones, but also to match some of the multiphonics in the saxophone. Um, but they're all like pretty standard preparations.
The ratchet, I believe, is something that was new for me. Using the
Yeah,
ratchet, low strings. So when you
yeah,
would turn the ratchet, you get that percussive sound, like a rhythmic sound, and you would also get a bit of the resonance of those two strings that it was like next to.
hmm
So that was pretty interesting and unique for me.
yeah. That's a shout out to Party City in in Nassau County, man. They like Party City has all the little these little like quarter bins, 25-cent party favors, and there's one particular eraser that's like an ice cream cone that you can take the ice cream off and you just have the cone, and it's got this little nub where you would get the ice cream part to stay on, and it like fits perfectly in between the strings but also mutes adjacent strings. It's like really, it's surprisingly perfect. The cheeseburgers are also pretty great, but sometimes they fall apart, so you got to get a lot of them. But yeah, then I found these like tiny little toy ratchets that wedge perfectly in the low strings, and those are like twofold because it kind of pushes the strings out a little bit, so you get these interesting overtones and harmonics. But you also then play the string, and the handle of the ratchet makes a great buzzing, rattling sound. And then you can turn the ratchet and get these clicks that then resonate through the piano. So it's like 4 or 5 sounds in this little 25-cent thing.
I'm going to play the second excerpt now, and it starts off with the chorus of Vautoffel, so you get a sense of that sound at the beginning of the excerpt, but then it moves into one of the big unison moments of the piece, and it's sort of the climactic moment. This piece, in a lot of ways, sort of has three kind of main sections. There's this introduction, this reveal, and then we start moving into more sort of unison hits and material where we're actually playing together in teams or as an ensemble, and then the end, which we'll get to later. But this is in the middle section of the piece, and is sort of one of the more bombastic. But again, yeah, starting with the Waldteufel texture. Hold on to your So I think, Chris, you had a question about the end of that excerpt.
Yeah, so I was gonna ask you, Dennis, about the like the short little chorus element because of all the pieces on our record, actually, I think that's the only one that requires us to have like some sort of like match pitched singing, and it comes in later during the piece. But what was the like sort of inspiration for that or the idea behind that? And also, is that something that you've sort of incorporated in your other music and the other pieces that you've written, like sort of like choral type singing?
Yeah, I have. So I guess to answer your last question, yeah, I've I guess incorporated plenty of singing. Maybe not like that. Usually, there'll be kind of more like this pitched speaking technique that I'll use a lot, where I want to ask for a specific pitch or anything, or maybe you're matching a pitch somewhere else in the ensemble, but then to just kind of like speak quickly on one note or a series of notes. But yeah, it's something, I mean, I put that in and took it out like 20 times, because it just felt like something to like not really go there lightly, because it's such a like, that like pure open fifth, and when I use a lot of text, a lot of times I purposely kind of obscure the words. So it's also a bit new to like have it be so on the nose. But I guess I was trying to think about finding a place of cohesion and kind of like fragility and like beauty before because the whole thing kind of the whole piece kind of pivots and fractures at that point. Maybe I guess where the words kind of come from is the idea of like hold on to whatever. It doesn't matter what you're holding on to your something, whatever it is you're going to hold on to as things kind of break down. And also, I mean, I was inspired. I was listening to this album a lot at the time, from a solo black metal project called Leviathan, and his last album, Scar-Sighted. And there's a chorus moment in that album that like comes out of like 25 minutes of kind of being assaulted, like orally assaulted. And then it's really haunting and kind of beautiful and kind of just like, again, this like really amazing kind of cohesive moment. And I think the inspiration I took from him was that he just like, he sits on it for maybe 3 or 4 seconds, and then you kind of are being orally assaulted again, for the rest of the album. But it kind of feels like this, this kind of like this centering center point of that album, and so there was probably a little inspiration there.
Yeah, I was going to say its placement is really satisfying. You know, even though it's like if you listen to the piece for the first time, it's unexpected, but it feels like it should belong. You know, and it's also nice because it's right after the whole bass drum scraping the head of the bass drum, the sandpaper, and we have all those sort of really agitated hits together as an ensemble. And then, like you said, like that whole pivot sensation occurs in the piece, and then it's like the heavens have come spoken to you for a few minutes, and then or a few seconds, and then it transitions to the ending of the piece. But yeah, I always thought that was a very, very clever and satisfying spot in the piece. I'm surprised that you sort of agonized about having it in there or not having it in there. I thought that I never would have thought that, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an about face. I think when I started writing the last like 2.5 minutes of the piece is when it felt like it fit a bit more, because again, it feels like a pivot to a place that is a bit more fragile and a bit more like coming from a more heartfelt place than the rest of the piece that's more just I don't know.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, it gives you a little relief for a few seconds there, and then it goes back to the assaulting. So pretty awesome.
Dennis, you mentioned the end of the piece, and I think it's worthwhile to hear one last excerpt to hear this because it's so different than the rest of the piece. And like you mentioned, following that sort of pivotal moment of the chorus, everything sort of takes on a different pace. It's a much slower tempo marking, and in this section, you really get to hear the piano and some of the preparations as you and Andrew are both speaking about. So this is a section just from the end of the piece. And you know that moment is my favorite moment of the piece, that slide sandpaper on bass drum with the saxophone air sound
Me too.
crescendoing into that piano chord. There's something about that moment, and I believe it's everything you've worked up to that point to express, and then everything following that point where it basically falls away into this sort of solo inside the piano to the end of with a ratchet sound right to the very last crank of the ratchet. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about the end and how you came to that point in the piece.
The piece is so dense to that point, and so there's really nothing there that hasn't already happened. It's just taking time to sit in, the resonances of these beautiful chords and the piano. I guess visually, I was kind of imagining looking at a page of the score with that earlier in the piece and like physically ripping things out and then grabbing something and pulling it and stretching it. Because when you stretch something, and of course the duration gets longer, but it also, like, as you stretch something, like if you could imagine, like when you do that thing with silly putty and you like put it on a newspaper and then the print ink is on the silly putty and then you can stretch it. Am I out of my mind? Okay, you know what I'm talking about. Like things become very warped as you start to pull them and stretch them in that way. But I guess that was an image. I was also just like in a different physical space. And I had done all of the piano preparations initially at a school I was teaching at the time, and written all that very earlier frantic material amidst a bunch of like crazy high school kids running around. Maybe that's why the piece wound up being so frantic. And then, you know, I like left that job and like everything stopped. And then I wrote the end of that piece at Adelphi University, and it was like August and nobody's on that campus in the summer, and just like had to prepare a piano in the practice room, and just like it was like, you know, the starkness of like those rooms and the like white walls and the fluorescent light, and like, you know, there was something like very cold about that vibe that was strangely comforting. But I think it was just like having that like insular space and like being completely alone for, you know, 12, 14-hour sessions.
Well, Under Nails, the first track on Brain on Fire, our debut album from Hypercube, it's on the New Focus Recordings label, and it's available on Bandcamp. Just go to Hypercube on Bandcamp. You can also go to our website, hypercubemusic.org. You can also go to New Focus Recordings, the website there. You can purchase the physical copy, which we have here, at Amazon, at basically anywhere CDs are sold. So thank you for your time, Dennis, and thanks everybody.
Thanks, y'all.